What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. Hearthstone definitely does kind of suffer from a problem of the fact that there's really just so much net decking that goes on, and really what that ends up resulting in is that the best decks generally get figured out pretty fast and decide the entire metagame. Still though, sometimes the best decks all have a common weakness that can definitely be exploited, and this results in some pretty neat anti-meta or off-meta decks that might seem weird or not be popular, but could potentially do really well on the ladder. Today we're going to be talking about one of these pretty sweet decks, which is going to be Reno Warrior, which we've been messing around with quite a bit on ladder to a lot of success. So without further ado, let's go through the card choices a little bit and take a look at what you can do to learn how to play this deck. So starting with the card choices, let's just run through everything really quickly. Shield Slam's pretty standard for just every controlling warrior deck. You got Whirlwind as well. We can't really play double Revenge since it's a Reno deck, so we do want a little bit more Area of Effect, another Grom activator as well. And the Whirlwind also works great with things like Ravaging Ghoul or Baron Geddon for building some actual decent amount of damage for an AoE board clear. Armorsmith, of course, because we need the more early game. We can't play doubles of things like Fiery War Axe, so Armorsmith is a really solid early drop that lets us build up some defense. We've got a Cruel Taskmaster in there as well, which is another Grom enabler and a very versatile card. Lets you trade up a lot, just kill 1 health minions. It's great both in the early game and in the late game. We've also got a Doomsayer. Doomsayer is actually super amazing when it's drawn early. You get to play it against your opponent's Totem Golem and just wipe their board and give yourself tempo. Since once the Doomsayer blows up, you're the first one that, of course, gets to put more things back on the board. We've also got an Execute in there as well, very standard stuff similar to Shield Slam. Fiery War Axe, of course, don't think I really need to talk about that one that much. It's just one of the best weapons in the game. It does so much stuff. We've also got a Jeweled Scarab. So Scarab gives us something to do on turn 2 a lot, and also gives a lot of options with the discover mechanic of the ability, since Warrior has a lot of really awesome 3-mana spells and really awesome 3-mana minions. Versatility is really important when we don't have the consistency that a regular deck would provide. Since we're playing a Reno build, we just don't get the consistency of playing 2 copies of every card, and so Jeweled Scarab definitely helps out with that. And since we're playing a bunch of one-ofs, we definitely want our cards to be as versatile as possible. Revenge is pretty much our second copy of Whirlwind. It's very similar. The additional effect of being at 12 or below life is actually quite awesome sometimes because it works super well with Reno, since you can do that effect, get the board clear, and then just heal to full HP. But it's also a really versatile AoE effect, so definitely going to belong in a deck like this one. We've also got Slam, since this deck can be a little bit inconsistent. We want as many cycling effects as we can get. Some draw, Acolyte of Pain, same thing, some draw and stuff. A Bash for just a really solid removal spell. We've got Fierce Monkey for that great early game taunt to metagame against aggro and stuff, and kind of slow the game down against the decks that are a little bit faster. And now we start to get into some of the more interesting cards. We've got Mind Control Tech, which is a really solid card to have, actually, if you can find room for it in a lot of decks these days. 3-mana 3/3 at worst, but sometimes it ends up stealing a Tyrion, a Ragnaros, or at least just completely winning the early game for you if your opponent happens to flood the board early on into the game. And it's not a ton of sacrifice for a potential card that just completely wins games all by itself. And it's something that is actually quite powerful against the metagame right now of just a very aggressive, dominated meta. We've also got a Ravaging Ghoul, which of course is, again, a really strong warrior minion in pretty much most decks, honestly. Gives us that nice AoE effect and a decent body as well. It's great against aggro decks. Shield Block, again, we kind of want to cycle through our deck, makes it a little bit more consistent, I guess, and potentially gives us some armor as well, and does great against Freeze Mage and stuff. We've also got an Ellis. A lot of cards in this deck are geared to be sort of early game focused or to be very situational. So Ellis gives us a really good option against very controlling decks without sacrificing too much, since she's also a pretty decent early game body as well against the more aggressive decks in the meta. And we've also got a Sen'jin Shieldmaster. So we're pretty low on 4-drops actually in this deck, and Sen'jin does kind of the same thing as a Fierce Monkey. So it's a great card to include to help out with our matchups against the more aggressive lists that are pretty relevant in the meta. Of course, you got a Brawl as well. Harrison Jones, a lot of weapon classes are really good on the ladder, so Harrison's definitely a must-have pickup in the meta right now. We've got an Ironforge Portal, just a pretty solid card all around, gives us armor, makes us a minion, just kind of like a standard card right there. We've got Justicar Trueheart, of course, it's completely insane, just absolutely amazing in any controlling warrior deck. And of course, Reno Jackson, the whole reason we built the deck was to take advantage of Reno. Reno by himself, he's incredibly strong. He wins tons of games all by himself, and it also synergizes extremely well with a lot of effects in the warrior class, like Revenge. You've got all sorts of stuff that you can pull off with Reno in this deck. We've got a Sylvanas, a very solid minion all around. One of the most important things about it is that it lets us beat things like a Nubarak against maybe a N'Zoth Rogue or Tyrion against Paladin decks. It's a great wildcard tool to have and does some really heavy lifting in a lot of the kind of weird or unexpected matchups in the meta. Baron Geddon is also really awesome against a lot of classes. It's really good right now when there's a lot of Shaman. You can never really have too much AoE in this meta, and having that consistent 2 points of that AoE board clear is just really awesome. We've also got a Gorehowl, an awesome, just really board controlling card. Works great because we have Reno, so we can get a lot of healing from it. A lot of people definitely underestimate how good Gorehowl is, but in a more against a more mid-rangey or slower matchups, it can really win the entire game by itself. We've also got the Grom and Alexstrasza combo, so that's going to let us get that nice burst damage potential win against decks that maybe have a stronger late game than the warrior deck, like maybe a heavy control priest or like a Murloc Paladin, if we don't really get the chance to armor up a lot. Of course, we've also got a Ragnaros, which is a really solid late game threat, one that usually forces the opponent to use a lot of removal to deal with, and can honestly sometimes pull some really awesome moves with a little bit of RNG on your side. Again, the Alexstrasza as well works great with the Grom, gives us that nice 2-turn kill combo that's really important to have against a lot of matchups. And closing out the list, we've got a Deathwing, which can sometimes actually just straight up win against decks like Zoo or Shaman, and if it's not that great, you can kind of just hold on to it, and it's not really that big of a cost for the potential game-changing benefit that it can sometimes give. So now that's the list, that's all the cards we've got. Let's take a look at the strengths and weaknesses of this warrior build. So it's very, very powerful against aggressive decks, so much more so than just a standard control build. It's got also really good options against mid-range and other control decks too, if you understand how to play the matchups, use your resources and stuff like that. Probably my favorite thing about this deck is that it's actually really fun to play. Every game's really different. And although that kind of comes from the fact that the deck's a little bit inconsistent because it is, of course, a Reno build, every game's different. You're going to be having all sorts of different situations and choices and stuff, and it makes the deck very compelling to play. And also, kind of like a lot of other warrior decks, it's just going to win some matchups completely for free. You play against Freeze Mage, that's going to be the easiest game of your life. Play against Malagos Rogue, you're going to have a really easy time. There's a lot of interesting matchups that the deck kind of just wins straight up, and that's something that can definitely get you some nice benefits if you're trying to climb the ladder. As for the weaknesses though, I would say that this deck is fairly skill intensive. You're going to get punished for your misplays quite a lot actually. One wrong decision might potentially just cost you the entire game. So you are definitely going to have to get a lot of experience with the deck before you really start to climb the ladder with it. It also does have inconsistent draws. Since you're only playing one of everything, that's a pretty standard weakness that Reno decks have in general. It also can have some rough matchups, if you play against a very heavily controlling priest deck, or you play against maybe like a N'Zoth Rogue, those matchups can be very difficult to beat. But fortunately for us, the reason why this deck is so awesome is because those rough matchups are just things that people don't play very often. It's something that's not really that relevant in the meta, and as a result, it gives our Reno Warrior build quite a lot of success on the ladder. So for some tips and tricks for you guys trying to play this deck out for yourself, see if you can make it work, definitely against burst or combo decks like Malagos decks or maybe Murloc Paladin or something like that, you really need to focus on armoring a ton over developing threats. Really get your Justicar in as early as possible, plan for that super late game, plan to survive that 30 damage combo in the future, and really prepare and expect that. As for really aggressive decks, if you don't really have any early plays because maybe you get a bad hand or a bad mulligan, you might actually be forced to just play your MC Tech on turn 3, otherwise you're going to get run over and killed before you can top deck that brawl. You really need to just fight for the board as aggressively as you possibly can if you're not, in a good position in the early game. As well, of course, definitely don't play your Deathwing if your opponent hasn't used their typical removal spells that could just kill Deathwing instantly. You know, if you're playing against a Shaman, they haven't used their Hex, a Druid hasn't used their Mulk, or maybe a Mage hasn't used their Polymorph, you definitely need to try and bait out those removal tools before playing Deathwing if you can afford to. Also, if you're very behind on the board, sometimes you can just play the Doomsayer as a 0/7 taunt to stall for a turn, because of course they're going to have to kill it, and it does save you that 7 points of health, which can be pretty nice sometimes. And as well, something that can work quite effectively is if you're playing against a N'Zoth deck, or just decks with really strong death rattles, you can save your Sylvanas and Shield Slam to take the minion from them. You know, take their Nubarak, take their Tyrion, something like that, and as a result, they're not going to get the revive when they play in the N'Zoth, and that can be like a really powerful tool that you're going to have to make use of if you want to win in those matchups, since the deck definitely isn't favored against most N'Zoth lists. And as well, if you ever need to, you can definitely remember that you can slam your own minions. It's not that bad of a play in general. Either way though, overall, you know, Reno Warrior is actually a pretty strong choice on ladder right now. Definitely provides a lot of unique games, which is something that I think is very underestimated in terms of choosing decks to play on ladder. You know, it's not boring to get good at the deck, even if you're losing a bunch of games at first. You know, you're gonna have a ton of fun experimenting, learning stuff, and you can play a lot of games with it because it's not gonna get stale very quickly. However, probably one of the biggest downsides of this deck is that it does cost a lot of dust to make, so for you budget players, unfortunately it's not going to be the best option, and it does take a while to learn, but for someone like me, I think the fact that it takes a while to learn is actually a plus rather than, you know, a downside, because that just makes the deck usually a lot more fun in most cases. But I mean, if you have a lot of dust, if you're willing to put in the time and just enjoy the deck, it's definitely going to be an awesome deck for you guys, and at the end of the day, it's definitely going to ensure some ladder success. So what decks are you guys laddering with right now? Definitely let us know in the comments section below, and either way, looks like that's going to be it for me. If you guys enjoyed the video, drop a like, subscribe if you want. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.